Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of the toughest, most personal questions anyone can face. It's a question that always seems to surface right in the middle of a tragedy when we're desperately searching for answers.
You know the feeling. A natural disaster hits, a terrible accident happens, or we see some human-caused catastrophe, and this is the question that just hangs in the air. It's a question that can really challenge your faith, create a ton of doubt, and just leave you feeling completely lost.
And right in the middle of all that pain, we've all heard these simplistic and honestly hurtful answers. The one you see here is a real quote from some fundamentalist preachers after a huge disaster. And these kinds of explanations, they don't offer any real comfort. In fact, they usually cause a huge social backlash because they just feel cruel, and they miss the point entirely. So to get why these answers fail so badly, we have to look at the logical trap they fall into.
To really see why those kinds of statements are so unhelpful, we first have to understand this intellectual trap that, honestly, a lot of well-meaning people fall into. It actually has a specific name and a really long history.
It's called Theodicy. Now, the term itself is coined by a philosopher named Leibniz way back in the 18th century, but the problem? Oh, it's ancient. It's this fundamental challenge of trying to defend God's justice in a world that seems so full of injustice.
The authors we are drawing from explain that this whole line of reasoning, which interestingly comes from ancient Stoic philosophy and not the Bible, sets up a really painful paradox. It starts with two core beliefs about God that most people would agree with, that God is all-powerful and that God is all good.
Okay, so if you accept both of those premises, that God is all-powerful and all-good, then logically evil shouldn't exist, right? An all-good God would want to get rid of it, and an all-powerful God would be able to. So the fact that evil does exist seems to force you into a corner. You have to conclude that either God isn't all-powerful or God isn't all-good. It's a total logical dead end, and it completely misses a much deeper, more biblical way of looking at things.
So to find that different perspective, the Bible doesn't give us a logical formula. It gives us a story. And there's no better place to see this in action than the ancient book of Job.
The whole story is basically a masterclass in taking apart that simple cause and effect logic. Job's friends show up and they are convinced his suffering has to be a punishment for some secret sin. But here's the kicker. God shows up at the end and explicitly rejects their neat little theories. And what's really telling is the contrast between their words and their actions. Their theories were totally wrong, but their first act, just sitting with him in total silence, sharing his grief for a whole week, that's shown to be the most powerful and helpful thing they did.
And here's the thing. At the end of the story, Job never gets a clear, logical reason for why he suffered. The whole backstory about a bet between God and Satan, that's for us, the readers. Job never finds that out. So the point of the whole book isn't about finding an answer. It's about showing that empathy, solidarity, and just being present for someone are way more profound responses to suffering than any theory could ever be.
Now, this lesson from Job, it leads to a really radical and powerful shift in how we think about God's role, moving way away from that distant philosophical God of the Stoics.
And if you just look at the word compassion, it tells you everything. It comes from Latin roots that literally mean to suffer with. The answer to suffering isn't some detached explanation. It's an active suffering with.
So the whole biblical view shifts from this idea of a distant God who kind of allows suffering from afar to a compassionate God who actually enters into our suffering. Some theologians call this the theodicy of an empathic God. The answer to the problem of pain isn't a logical argument, it's a person and a presence. It totally reframes the question from why did God let this happen to where is God while this is happening.
And the ultimate symbol of this isn't a thunderbolt from the sky, it's the cross. It represents a God who isn't immune to pain, but who experiences it from the inside, right alongside us. Our source material says this is a God who literally participates in the deep suffering and sighs of the entire world.
But okay, this brings up a really important question. If God suffers with us, are we just off the hook for all the suffering we cause? Absolutely not. In fact, this whole perspective makes our own responsibility even clearer.
This theological shift doesn't get rid of human accountability. Instead, it kind of forces us to take a hard look at our own role in causing pain. The sources we're looking at point to a really powerful tool that helps us shift our focus from a passive "why God" to a much more active "why us."
It's called attribution theory.
It sounds complicated, but it's basically just a way to analyze why something happened. Instead of just defaulting to a supernatural answer like it was God's will, it makes you do a more responsible analysis. Were the causes internal to a person, like a bad choice, or were they external, like a systemic failure? Were they controllable or not?
So let's apply this to a real-world tragedy like the Sewol ferry disaster. When you use this framework, the true causes become painfully obvious. Look at this table. The crew's decision not to evacuate passengers, that's an internal and controllable failure. But then you look deeper at that second row, and you see these huge external, systemic problems, what the source calls a moral hazard in society, with massive regulatory failures and a total disregard for safety.
See, blaming God for the Sewol disaster isn't just bad theology. It actually lets the human systems and the specific people who are responsible completely off the hook. Using a tool like this empowers us to identify, to name, and to actually address the real, human-caused injustices that create so much of the world's pain.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We've got the failure of cold logic, the lesson of presence from Job, this idea of a compassionate God, and the call for human responsibility. So what's the final takeaway? How should we act when we see suffering?
The sources argue that the truest response isn't a theory at all. It's a set of actions that are all rooted in compassion. It means putting empathy way before explanation. It means offering your presence instead of empty cliches. It means joining with people in their sorrow, and then taking action to fix the human and systemic brokenness that caused all that pain in the first place. It's about participating in that collective sorrow, a concept that's really deep in Korean culture known as Han.
And if we need one last simple reminder of what this really looks like, let's just go back to that number, 7. That's how many days Job's friends sat with him in silent solidarity. Before they ever tried to explain anything, they were just there. It's this timeless lesson that the most powerful, spiritual, and healing response to suffering often isn't an answer at all, but just a simple, shared presence.
So this is the bottom line. It's really a call to action. It challenges us to stop being these detached spectators who demand answers from the heavens and to start being active participants who provide comfort on the ground and work for justice in our own communities.
And that's really the question this whole perspective leaves us with. It's a choice, right? A choice between the cold logic of trying to explain suffering away and the warm embrace of simply sharing it. Thanks for joining this explainer.